And we are live. Hello, everybody, and welcome back. We've got an exciting show today. We've got Kenneth Shek. He's the CEO of Moca Network, and we're going to get into the fascinating and often misunderstood topics of digital identity, building out identity and DID frameworks in business, in gaming, and in the wider world. Kenneth, thank you so much for staying up late for us. I know you're out in Hong Kong. It is definitely late for you, so thank you so much for staying up. How are you doing today? Are you well?
Thanks for having me. I'm doing great. Landed from Turkey this morning, and you actually helped me get through the night, and so I didn't get jet lag, so I appreciate you.
There we go. Well, again, thank you so much for making the time. The Web3 CEO's life is rarely a restful one, so thank you for being with us. As always, this is a LinkedIn Live, so guys, if you have questions for Kenneth, if you have anything you'd like to know about Moca Network, about identity, about DID, or anything relating to the topics you hear today, please do ask those questions in the comments, and we'll try and get to them as quickly as we can, or as part of the discussion, or after the show. And do also let us know what you're building, where you're coming in from, give us your GMs, and let us get a little bit more information about the community so we can try and tailor this conversation to you guys. Kenneth, for those people who don't know you, could you give us your brief introduction? How did you find yourself working in Web3 and specifically in the Moca team?
Yeah, so I started my first company when I was in college, basically, many years ago, and started with social payment, and also working with a lot of the entrepreneurs and founders as well to help them build up their ventures, and across solar energy, and also started my company in AI machine learning as well, and also helped build cross-border e-commerce. Back then, actually based in Hong Kong, cross-border commerce into mainland China. Back then, it was very fierce competition, and I was part of that war, I would say. And before joining Animoca, I was actually running the data analytics AI practice for consumer businesses at Accenture. And I spent a few months there. As you know, based on my entrepreneurial and rebellious personality, I couldn't stay there for too long. I spent like 7 months there, and joined Animoca because Animoca reached out and be like, hey, let's join and build something. We got a lot of exciting things to do. So fast forward 4 years ago, basically started Moca Network from day one, and here we are building, we believe, is the largest identity network, and probably the most scalable and enterprise-ready solution out there too.
Wow, now that's one of the best intros that I've probably ever heard. Right, in there I heard you did payments, you did e-commerce, you did AI, you had a stint in Accenture, which I'm absolutely not surprised you lasted. 7 months is great. I spent a couple of years at IBM, and I was not an entrepreneur at the time. I probably am not an entrepreneur now, but I think Accenture is the literal antithesis of entrepreneurialism. It is a giant bureaucracy like IBM. So credit to you for doing that. But you've literally taken on some of the most competitive industrial spaces that exist: e-commerce, payments, spaces where there are thousands, if hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions of startups, all trying to take a little cut of little interesting specific businesses, and you find yourself now in identity, which I would argue also is one of the probably most crowded and busy spaces in terms of there's lots of different people trying to cut in at the identity space in different ways, and it is massively diverse. And so one of the reasons I'm so excited about having this conversation is I advise identity startups. I've worked with identity startups. I've worked for identity businesses, and it's really hard. What makes you, or what gives you certainty or confidence or conviction that Moca is doing it differently?
Yeah, so maybe start with, maybe I should miss a little small step actually before.
Oh, there's more.
Yeah, so yeah, my like the AI company co-founders, we basically experiment building decentralized VPN. So because we're frustrated about centralized VPN data center, every data and web traffic actually route through somewhere, maybe in mainland China or Hong Kong or anywhere in the world. And actually, while people are charging their phone, they can actually make money by having traffic route through their devices. So actually, privacy matters to me a lot personally. And obviously, there are two ends of the spectrum. One end of the spectrum of people care so much about privacy, they're almost like a nerd, and being like pretty crazy sometimes. But on the other end, majority, 99% of the people don't actually, they probably appreciate speed and convenience and everything over privacy. So I learned my lesson when we were building decentralized VPN is like, do you want to take, let's say, a few second latency for more privacy? The answer is no, no one would pay for that. So learning that lesson, going into identity, what I really, really appreciate about Web3 and blockchain, we can talk about a lot of different things. Some people talk about ownership, some people talk about privacy, some people talk about interoperability. And interoperability is a big word for me, and actually I value that a lot, right? And I think the promise of blockchain is really that internet interoperability. That's the promise. That's actually the real definition of Web 3.0. If you search it up, it's actually semantic web, right? So how you can actually allow data to be portable, and in between you got AI agents, and allow system and system, website and website, website and app to communicate with each other with the common standards. And I think we have been experiencing a lot of experiments of building network effects and trying to create different standards in space. The challenge is, if you want to create a standard and actually force or convince or influence or buy your way in to have everyone to align to that same standard is extremely hard, right? So at the end of the day is what actually matters to business. And that's why we get into identity, because identity is always the first touch point for every single user and every single distribution and every single app. When you go to any apps right now, let it be Revolut or Robinhood or Venmo and so on, the identity piece is always the first part of the onboarding. And all of the data actually behind identity is being behind closed door and the centralized database, and they never share that. But imagine if you can actually make your own identity data, you can re-own the data, and you can make it portable across all these apps. Imagine if you can prove your Stripe data to Robinhood, if you can prove your Robinhood data to, I don't know, like Binance. Like, imagine how much money they're able to reward you and pay you, or what kind of privileges and access. And if they can actually prove that the data is true. So that's why we got into identity, is to basically make data interoperable. And later on, we can talk about also our money vertical too, is to make money flow as well.
Got you. And I'm with you on the user experience versus vociferousness of the technology. If you look at anybody who's a privacy maxi, there's a very fine line between somebody who deeply cares about making the world better and sounding like a raving lunatic on the internet. And it's really hard, right? Because that passion comes across, but then the reason why privacy, the why should you as an audience member care, where people oftentimes are willing to give away data unwillingly, or have historically just happily been the data product for Google and Apple and others without necessarily caring because they get a great experience. That's the spectrum you're working on, I think, as an identity business or as a privacy business. From my experience at Midnight, and yours also, fully agree. The interesting thing is there is a requirement for it up to a point. And so you've got to find that nice space between, there's a huge amount of demand. This is something people will use every day. This is a data rail that needs to exist, but better, as opposed to, we're going to kind of capture the small cohort of people who maximalist care about this particular domain, and we're going to go and serve that niche. You know, shout out Zcash, Monero, shout out Nim, Harry Halpin, who's been on the show as well. Unfortunately, these are not yet mainstream products because they serve those niches. Whereas what it sounds like you're trying to do is to go much, much wider, broader, with the same principles, but in a more accessible way. Am I kind of in the right ballpark?
Yeah, exactly. I think at the end of the day, you run a company, you build a product, it's all about making trade-offs, right? Like, do we make a trade-off on performance for privacy? Do we make a trade-off of privacy for security? And they're always making trade-offs on a daily basis. I think most of the time, and in the past, we're not the first identity project, right? Like there are a lot of identity products out there, probably thousands or tens of thousands or even more. And I would say why most of the projects were not successful was because a lot of them actually focus on the tech and focusing on what is the idealism of privacy and identity for basically no one, or very minimal amount of people. Not even though as much as people say that they care about privacy, at the end of the day, it's all about making trade-offs. From a product perspective, you're making trade-offs. From a company and business perspective, you're making trade-offs, but also from a user perspective, they're making trade-offs, right? Like, do I want to save 10 minutes and click one button and go through the end-to-end process, right? Constantly, you're making trade-offs along the user journey and user experience. So able to identify that fine line along the spectrum is going to be very important. And as well as making sure everything is compliance, right? So we got a bunch of other partners actually reach out to us, let it be telcos or like entertainment groups and ticketing platforms and so on. Actually, they reach out to us because they want to solve the compliance problem. Just because I'm not sure if you know, but like in order for a company to share data among each other, they need to sign like data processing agreement. They need to have a user agreement and privacy policy. You need user to have explicit consent and revoke, and also being GDPR compliant. In India is DPDP, in Turkey is like KVKK. So there's like a bunch of these compliance, and how you can actually provide a agnostic, interoperable, scalable, and compliant solution that give user as much flexibility as possible in order for them to maximize their access, maximize their rewards, and maximize their privacy. In the meantime, able to share data with a broader ecosystem and network so that your network value would grow as a business. So that is really a long-winded answer to answer that question. Yes, like we're finding a fine line there. A lot of the projects are focusing on building the tech and the product, which is great. But also in the meantime, if you don't go out and talk to customers and talk to these enterprises, talk to compliance officer, talk to the chief commercial officer, talk to the CMO, you wouldn't know what they actually care about and who has the influence to make decisions. And at the end of the day, what actually matters. And by talking to them more, you're able to shape your product and make the right trade-offs, but not making too much assumptions about what you think is right and what you think is the ideal state of the product.
100%. And we can't assume that this is going to be a customer-led transformation, right? I think that's the thing that everybody assumes, right? Well, the people want privacy. It was like, yes, but the people who are implementing the technology are the businesses selling the stuff. And so if you can't provide something that is at least less expensive or at least as good performing with benefits for the business, they're not going to adopt you. Same story for Web3 in totality. And I probably want to nod back also to Web 3.0 versus Web 3, semantic web definition versus Gavin Wood's Web 3 definition. That's one that deserves a whole podcast by itself. But I love that you've gone back to the semantic web as your reference point, because actually that's a wider version or wider view of the web in general, rather than specifically the decentralized web, which I think Gavin chose to coin Web 3 in. But I see people using those interchangeably in the comment section. I'm like, do you mean the semantic version, or do you mean the blockchain version? Anyway, fully with you on, you have to provide software that is at least as good as something a business would use, and they will be the ones responsible for implementing. I mean, from a user perspective, we can just get rid of captcha forever. That'd just be fantastic. They're getting harder. They're getting more annoying. I had to log into Outlook the other day. Shout out Microsoft for ruining every user experience with 5 separate captchas of 3-dimensional shadows of different shapes or something. And then if you get one of the 5 wrong, right, you're back to the beginning. So I think at that point 4 or 3 out of the 5, I got one wrong, and I'm going back through this loop. And I was like, I never want to use a single Microsoft product ever again. But they should probably be your first customer.
Yeah, but you know what? Like, the interesting part is, before websites and Cloudflare and CloudFront, and these guys are helping you to gate and screen traffic from bots. And now if you talk to any websites, any services, they want as much bots as possible. They just want to screen who's the right bots and who's the bots who are going to pay you, right? So I would definitely imagine, and I'm pretty sure, because we also thought about building something like this, is basically having the reverse version of the CAPTCHA to screen good bots is not like screening out bots. And I believe that's going to be, and guess what? Like, what's actually the data source behind a good bot and a bad bot is identity, right? Who is behind the agent? We can get to that. I know, like, we're going to talk a little bit about that later.
That's the punchline for the whole show, right? The place that we're all going to get to, and the reason why people are going to listen to the next 10 minutes of us getting a little deeper in what it is you've built is exactly that. The bots we want. The bots need to identify themselves. We are going to see billions and billions of agents. The marginal cost of running up a second or third or fourth or 100th agent for users eventually will be near zero. We could be as close to setting up photographs. It'll just be different compute channels they go down. The cost of people creating agents to act on behalf of themselves, their business, or whatever else it is going to the floor. And so, like you said, the world and its activity will be intermediated by agents, and we have to build for that. So I'm excited to hear your thesis. Let's just go another level down on Moca for a second. So for those people who haven't come across Moca Network, what are the capabilities you've built, and why is this a little different to, like you said, the other 10,000 identity businesses that are out there? Because I myself personally, in preparation for this call, my personal experience is somehow somebody is funding these 10,000 businesses. Somehow they're managing to stay afloat and not end up on the junk pile. Who is doing it? How are these businesses making money? How can there be space for so many organizations and businesses doing this everywhere?
Well, that's a great question. So first and foremost, identity is extremely hard to monetize. But then identity is extremely attractive as an ideology for investors and also for entrepreneurs, just because it makes sense. And it's a problem that hasn't been solved, and it has only been solved by big tech, right? Like, who is the biggest identity players out there? Google,
because
Meta.
They have the critical mass, they have the scale, they have the captive audience already, so they have the ability to influence, as opposed to top down, as opposed to bottom up.
Exactly. But what would be the grassroots solution of identity and allow users to take back control and allow networks to form their network just because things are open and interoperable, right? That is exactly what Moca is trying to build here. You got the likes of Apple, Meta, Google. They basically accumulated a lot of data by their own rights, right? Because they build free, valuable services to people that people would like to make trade-offs again, right? Like trade-offs for giving them data. In return, the users are getting convenience, but then now they ring-fence their very valuable database. And if two companies that Google work with and they want to talk to each other and exchange data in a trustless way, there's actually no way to do that besides going to Google and pay Google, spend money on ads, and able to reach the user base on the other company website or app and so on. So Google, because they earned the right to own those data and ring fence those and protect the data, for arm twisting all these companies to actually pay them, right? It's kind of like probably a little bit political here, but I'm not trying to take stance on which side. But it's like a
great business model. If you can do it, right? I
Yeah.
mean, they have created the ring fence, and they're paying people to cross it. Oh, sorry, they're asking for people to pay to cross it. And if you've got a captive audience, if you've got a captive platform, and you can monetize it, market factors will determine that you can and you will.
Exactly.
Is it egalitarian? Is it fair? No. Is it user first? No. But that's not their job.
Yeah, exactly. So I used to work on solutions to enable two companies to exchange data, hash the PII, exchange data in a clean room, match the data, send data back to both sides, right? So if you think about it, essentially what Moca is doing is to enable exactly that, but there's a user in between these companies with user consent. It's not two companies behind closed door, hey, I pay you $5 per user, throw in your data there, hash the data, and then get data on both sides, right? Without the user knowing about it. What Moca is doing is enabling the user to be in between these companies. The user is going to company A to be like, this is my data. The user is the data processor because it's the user data that they own. They bring those data to company B, and again, acting as the data processor and share data with company B. In that sense, you're able to create a monetization model here where company A is the data issuer and company B is the data verifier. As a data issuer, because you issue the data, you're able to monetize based on that data verification transactions.
And you route through the individual in the middle, which dramatically simplifies the liability and the commercial model as well.
Exactly. So the user is the data processor. In the normal circumstances, all these companies are data processors. If you have like 1,000 companies in the ecosystem, you need to sign 1,000 data processing agreements among all these companies. And there's very messy consent management and revoke process and data storage and data encryption and so on. If you introduce the user in the middle to allow the user to make the data portable and interoperable, make it verifiable, and there's a built-in monetization economic model there that actually benefit everyone in the ecosystem to win together, right? So
that is super smart. So many people have missed that part of the that architectural approach as viable. Very few people do that. I find that incredibly intelligent and very viable.
Yeah. So, for example, one very good example is advertiser and publisher is basically the company A and company B that I talked about. Advertising is a very strong use case for identity. If it's not clear enough, like that's exactly why Google, Apple, Meta is investing in identity, right? But no one in identity is actually building in ad tech, right? Like, why is that? Just because like no one is actually focusing on the business use cases. And you got two parties, advertiser and publisher. Publisher owns a lot of data. There's a lot of traffic. Publisher is saying, hey, advertiser, I got a lot of valuable data. All my users are Lamborghini owners. And advertisers, great, I'm going to pay you $5,000 per user. Send them my way. And you send the users over, the advertiser is like, dude, like these guys are not buying anything from me, right? These guys are not valuable at all. It's not as what you said, right? So if you can actually, from an advertiser side, can actually prove and verify that data and make sure that data is trusted and from a trusted issuer, and you can basically monetize a lot more, right? And the user and the traffic, you can verify them as well. And in the meantime, for publisher, you don't actually need to violate any privacy policy because the user are proactively encrypting, decrypting, and generating proof to present to the advertiser and be like, this is my data. I'm coming here to buy your stuff. Give me the best offers that you could give, right? That's just one example, but there's a lot more instances with the partners that we work with. We were also fascinated by those use cases sometimes.
It's a powerful one. It's one I think everybody can relate to. But also to your point around why have identity businesses not started building ad tech is, I suspect a large amount of the time it's because they are really good at identity, and building ad tech is materially different. It's a big data commercialization and marketplace business, whereas identity is a data routing business with compliance tacked on the end. I'm oversimplifying for the example, but it's a bit like saying, why have we not seen more dApps in Web3? Well, it's because all of the foundations are really good at building protocols, but not so many of them have got that experience of building applications that businesses or people want to use.
Exactly. That's a great analogy, right? Like, because everyone's focusing on building the identity infrastructure, which is base layer. You have the infrastructure there, but if there's no use cases on top, no one is going to use that. And naturally, you see a lot of KYC providers, right? And why do you see a lot of KYC providers? Because that's the most straightforward and direct way to build use cases around identity. And imagine how many KYC providers are out there right now. Probably we should ask like Gemini or Claude, and we should kind of get an answer there. Basically, analysts, right? I'm saying KYC and compliant and AML, accredited investor check, credit score, all these data are so important, right? But then that's not the only use cases. But even if we just narrow and focus on that use case, how many KYCs you have done, Anthony, in your whole life? Is it more than 50, 30?
It's not every day. So it's not a volume business, right? It's something you do periodically, but it's certainly not part of the everyday login, everyday verification, every single API call verify.
Yeah, but I mean, even if you have the same passport or same identity, you cannot actually reuse across multiple platforms too. Like even just one wallet, for instance, if you want to on-ramp to one wallet, you want to deposit fiat, and then next step you want to generate and create a debit card, and then next step you actually want to send money to overseas, you need to do 3 different KYCs there. And because those services are provided by 3 companies and 3 vendors.
Yep.
Right? With interoperable data that Moca Network can provide, which is what we're building, you have one KYC provider to issue data, and then you have two to 3 different verifiers basically to verify the same data. From a user perspective, is one-click onboarding. And you don't over and over do your data verification and issue data everywhere in the world. And at some point, it's like a honeypot. You would basically lose your data to any hackers or dark web or something, right? So KYC is just one example, but imagine you can do KYC, but you can use the KYC data to do age verification, right? EU right now is enforcing hard age verification. Pornhub was being banned in Australia because the Australian government is actually enforcing hard age verification, and Pornhub decided to exit the market. So you can imagine, right, like how scalable and composable and programmable the data around identity could be, and not just the KYC use cases. In stablecoin and payment, we talk about programmable money, but how you can create logic around program for money without identity data, without knowing the user behind the transaction, right? So that's what really fascinates me all the time, and tons of use cases.
Love that. So what we've got is we've got a slightly more expansive view of the identity business. You're starting to take on more components of the stack, which makes sense. You understand the monetization part of it as well. So it's not just the pure primitives. You also have a view into the parts of it that have become commoditized. And so being another commodity in an already largely competitive commodity business isn't going to be the route to winning. It sounds like a good formula. Let's get into the use cases. So obviously, Animoca Brands, it's already a huge ecosystem. I think 600 projects plus as a sandbox, if you will, to get started. But talk to me about where are you demonstrating the value, or how are you getting Moca Network to demonstrate success early?
Yeah, so definitely the Animoca ecosystem is giving us a head start in terms of talking to customers, knowing what kind of data they have, what kind of data they're willing to issue, what kind of data they need, how much they're willing to pay for, getting initial adoption of identity products. But if you look at all the recent announcements and all the partners that we work with, are actually not just within the Animoca ecosystem and portfolio. A lot of them are actually large user-based enterprises and consumer apps with hundreds of millions of users. And it could be ranging from football apps to a ticketing platform in Turkey, to an entertainment group in the US, to a telco in South Korea. Basically, all these are not Web3 native portfolio companies. These are real enterprise. I'm not saying Web3 companies are not real. I'm saying like people like to use that.
They're not Web3 native. They didn't start in Web3, or they didn't grow out of Web3. That's the best, most politically sensitive version of, if you're not built on the blockchain, you're not worthwhile. Or if, it's like real world assets, right? Well, if assets that are not in the real world, are they unreal? Are they virtual? Is Web3 not real anymore? Benefit of the doubt, the audience will follow you. Don't worry.
Yeah, so basically all these enterprises have big problems to solve. They either want to solve compliance problems, they probably want to solve a problem with very fragmented data sources, actually coming from 30, 50 business units that hate each other, don't want to talk to each other, but they need to share data with each other. And they somehow want to do like a transfer accounting of booking revenue across all these platforms by sharing data in users, right? Or there's payment companies that actually find onboarding friction costing them a lot of money, just because the conversion rate of doing KYC and failure in terms of verification is stopping them to convert and generate revenue. Also, it comes down to ticketing platform that usually is a very single direction kind of user journey and very narrow kind of use case. You buy a ticket and then you go to a concert, right? But then that person, that fan who is buying the ticket and going to concert is actually a very valuable user, because before that person buy a ticket, they would actually do research, but then after they buy a ticket, they would book their flights, they would book their hotel. After going to the concert, they would go to restaurants, right? And there are a bunch of things that actually is building around the fan identity, right? So the use cases is really ranging from the most boring but very important part of it, which is compliance, KYC, AML, but then also going to basically becoming that identity infrastructure for affiliate marketing, growth marketing, loyalty program, and all those kind of use cases. But then you also have like GDPR compliance kind of really deep identity infrastructure that actually help manage consent, data encryption, storage, deletion, and revoke. So we work with telcos, entertainment groups, and these companies really all over the world. As I said, like sometimes I'm even still surprised by some of the use cases in very unique countries with very specific use cases.
I love that. That alone, that last kind of 30, 45 seconds depicts perfectly the challenge of somebody working in this space, because in other industries, and especially Web3, we look at finance versus non-finance. When you look in tech, you look at regulated versus non-regulated. In your case, you actually have universal regulation, but jurisdiction specific. You have financial, non-financial industries, yes, but then you also have the user journey and the value of the identity from an advertiser's perspective, or from a total size of purchase or customer lifetime value perspective. And you've got to be responsible for prioritizing, because what you're creating ultimately, I think, is universal infrastructure. But you have to deploy it in particular spaces. As a CEO, how do you prioritize?
Well, that's a great question. It took us probably 6 months to realize what is the right prioritization, because like we also talk to a lot of people and learn from what actually matters. There was a few cool tech that we built and we thought is very cool to people and companies. And at the end, no one really cares. They're like, why do I want to verify this data and adding friction to the user, but it's not actually adding to my top line, right? And I realized I was talking to the CCO, like that person basically just care about making money. They don't care about privacy. They don't care about making sure you're able to verify that user. They only care about what actually gets converted and how big the transaction basket is.
Minimum viable compliance for maximum customer retention and revenue.
Exactly.
It's a very simple trade-off for them, but as you said, from a product perspective, I think it's actually super hard to optimize. Also, company by company, that's going to look different, or industry by industry, that's going to look slightly nuanced. But I love that you already started through the journey. We built some really cool stuff, and we realized nobody wanted it.
Exactly. Well, it costs us a lot of money too. It costs us a lot of money, a lot of man hours. It costs us a lot of debates, right? And focus, and really, like if we're able to go to customers way earlier and actually talking and going to the boardroom and actually presenting this and look like an idiot, that if we do that quicker, then we could have saved a lot of cost and money and time. But gladly, like in 6 months, we're able to actually finally prioritize in the right way to basically identify use cases that help companies make money and monetize. It's not to help them as like a hygiene factor, right? If you are actually providing a solution for them as a hygiene factor, as they will see you as a cost center. And that concept, you would always be the most annoying person in the room and the most boring and annoying person in the room, because you are always asking for money for things that they hate already. They want to pay someone and get rid of you and then call it a day so that they can move on to make money. So
all right. Hold up there, because everybody listening in, that last 30 seconds is probably the most useful 30 seconds for the entire Web3, right? What Kenneth has described there is building solutions that are revenue generating, not a cost center, that you can take to the market, to industries, to leaders, to whoever you're talking to, and say, I am going to make you money by using the thing that we've built that is better than what you have now. And I'm absolutely certain 99% of people in Web3 have never gone through that logical flow before talking about the thing or even building the thing. And that to me is a really beautiful moment of clarity. This is CEO. This is why we have CEOs on the show. That is CEO level wisdom in absolutely beautiful brevity. Thank you for that.
Yeah, and thank you for highlighting that too. I think most of the people in the space are probably stuck at the first stage that I experienced. Like, to be fair, I also experienced that, right? Like, building something that's cool, is amazing, is the best standard, is the latest one. Vitalik just talked about it. We should do it. Everyone go after the same thing, but no one really actually questioned like who is paying for it, why would they pay for it, if they pay for it, how they can make more money than the money that they pay. And that sounds very simple, but that logical flow, as you said in your words, isn't that straightforward to a lot of people. So we really focus on that, right? Like, we look into which industry has problems that they want to solve that can help them make money, not save money. And that's why we also expanded our vertical, not just identity as well. I think identity, as I said, and we agreed earlier in the call before we went live, is extremely hard to monetize. It's extremely hard to basically present something and be like, yes, like I would pay a lot of money for this. Identity is always, and I already got to a realization, identity itself is not born and designed for a business on its own, unless you go to like billions of users. Identity by itself is an enabler for identity plus XYZ, identity plus ABC, right? And identity on its own is not just for onboarding, it's actually like an infrastructure to enable a network and enable a network to grow by sharing data. But beyond that, actually, once you're able to enable data sharing in a privacy preserved and a compliant way, there's so much you can do, right? You can do loyalty, you can do payment, you can do stablecoin, you can do agentic commerce, you can do a bunch of stuff. Everything is based on identity, right? So the question is, which part you should focus on? Is agentic commerce ready now? If we put money and focus and allocate development resources there, are we going to monetize in the next 6 months, right? Or we should allocate our resources to telcos, right? So those are the questions that we ask ourselves on a day-to-day basis, and they're constantly changing, to be fair. But I would say recently, in the past probably 6 to 9 months, we actually got to a point where we're very, very clear where our focus should be.
Very good indeed. And also, let's be clear, it's not trivial to make any of those product choices. I'll give you an example. Probably 15 years earlier in my career, I worked with a very large payments processor who was looking to create a marketplace for targeted advertising. Now, this was in a very early e-commerce stage. We were nowhere near AI. We were nowhere near any sort of predictive or automation that would have been useful. They had millions and millions of customers, hundreds of thousands of merchants, but the building of the marketplace was what took the whole thing down. They had all the data and the targeting for customer segments, but they couldn't build a marketplace big enough that was targeted and personalized enough to actually be viable from a commercial perspective. And so tell me a little bit about what you have built on the side. You talked about the money business, you talked about stablecoins. Tell me about what you've built as adjacencies to the identity primitives that allow you to be able to do that.
Yeah, so just like any identity infrastructure business, they start with KYC. So we have like a amazing protocol, actually is the largest one on chain called zkProofs, building on top of our infrastructure. And they actually have 3.5 to 4 million verified users already, and building on the Moca infrastructure now. KYC is like most straightforward one. But then also affiliate marketing, we're able to basically build advertiser and publisher network, right? Like we are the marketplace of connecting advertiser and publisher. There's so much valuable data is being issued directly in app. One very unique thing about Air, which is the Moca product, is that our consumer app customers and partners are able to embed wallet and identity in the existing application. And what that means is if you're having, let's say, a Spotify login, you log in with Spotify, it automatically generate a wallet for you. And all the data around your Spotify, what kind of musicians you like, how many hours you stream, all this data can be issued by Spotify to that identity. And then the user can use the same login, a single sign-on across all the partners that we work with. They just go to another platform. Let's say they go to, I don't know, like Deliveroo, and they log in with Spotify. Deliveroo is able to actually verify that Spotify data already. So
that's super powerful. That's really interesting, because then you're using or capturing or creating new profiles of data that should be available to the user by API, or that is available to the user by API, but you're making it seamless and super easy for the user, and also in a way that's not invasive or requires custom integration to the platforms you're capturing from. That's awesome. That's really cool.
And we don't get access to the data because all the data is encrypted by the user private key themselves. Like no one else other than the user, unless they click button and say that I want to verify for this app to verify my data. Other than that, no one else can actually verify that data and get access to it. So it's kind of like a gigantic Google Drive for the user, but then that Google Drive is not owned by Google, it's owned by the user themselves. They can always encrypt and decrypt and retrieve the data anytime they want. If you granted access to a certain app to access that before, you can click a few buttons and revoke it, and no one can access that data anymore. And cryptographically as well, right? So it's not like just clicking a checkbox and stuff like that, and hopefully someone delete your data behind the scene. So really making that data interoperable, you're able to build a massive data network that we don't own. We are the facilitator of that data network. And as more data is being issued by embedding identity in these consumer apps, as you make them grow, as you make data shareable, and as you remove the trust assumptions and that paranoia between all these partners about sharing data, and your network on Moca and our infrastructure would grow over time and grow exponentially, right? So we already see that because for example, there's a gaming marketplace that integrates the ticketing platform that integrates. Once they integrate and once the users are being onboarded, once the data is being issued, we already got like very organic inbound coming to us and be like, hey, we love those users. Previously, like if you can prove that those users are paying users, I'm willing to pay X amount of dollars to verify that data and give them exclusive offers. So you start to see that network forming. And imagine you got one partner, an issuer, you got another partner that find that data valuable. That partner as a verifier, now they can issue data, and another verifier would come, and then it just accumulates as a snowball.
You're constantly enriching the data set, albeit the user is the one initiating. Right, so you're not having complicated competitive discussions. The user is kind of aggregating this rich picture of themselves that they will have a share in the monetization thereof. You've obviously got to build the marketplace and join the dots, but you're creating what is probably one of the most rich and interesting multi-platform data sets that is user controlled that anybody has.
Exactly, and then that's a very interesting case. If you didn't talk to a customer, like enterprise customer, you wouldn't know. Just imagine if Coca-Cola is a data issuer, would they want Pepsi to verify their user data and leak it, right? And we're like, okay, you made a good point. So, okay, we need to add a feature there, right? Like you as a data issuer, you own the data about the user. You have the right to whitelist and blacklist people who can actually access your data, right? You can proactively actually blacklist Pepsi from accessing Coca-Cola data in that sense, even though the user actually owns them, but the data is actually sourced from Coca-Cola.
So it makes your compliance officer and your legal officer feel really empowered in those conversations when normally they'd be on the sidelines. So it also gives them the feel goods too, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that makes a lot of sense, right? Like, I definitely wouldn't want my competitor to access my data. To be honest, like being on here and sharing a lot about these features, I'm also very paranoid about my competitors listening to this, and copy that feature, right? But at the end of the day, code is cheap nowadays. Yeah,
Also, momentum and user experience and the ability to pivot and the speed at which you're accruing the integrations, the data, the experience, the network. I often coach teams that I advise is don't spend your time looking at what other people are doing. If you're convinced enough about what you're building it at a speed that people won't catch up. Or you don't know how hard it is for others to pivot or for others to listen in and then do something different, or even to see the code base and do anything with that even before they've conceived it. Plus the accumulated knowledge of the relationships and the partnerships. The fact you're going to win deals is not necessarily because you've got the best tech, it's also because you're in the market, which
exactly.
at this point your competitors might not be. And so spending time living in fear of how quickly your competitors will copy the thing you do, I feel like it's necessary to be risk averse up to a point, but ultimately it's wasted energy. It's like imagining the car crash that you're going to have 3 weeks from now when you go driving to the supermarket. It's like, well, I could spend my whole time worrying about this crash that I might have, that I probably won't, or I can just go and have a nice drive into the countryside and go get some groceries.
Or another analogy is like the car crash would only happen if you stop driving. If you keep your car going, then the car wouldn't crash, right? Like if one day basically you decide to stop building and stop talking to customers, and you basically stop getting ahead, and then people would catch up, right? As long as we don't stop, then the car wouldn't crash.
Yep, that's another good analogy. There you go. For business leaders and CEOs listening into this one, there's gold dust. There's kind of nuggets and diamonds dropping every few minutes in this show. Kenneth, I'm really enjoying the conversation. We've got a few minutes left. We've got probably 7 minutes still to go. So I'm wondering, could we spend a beat on AI and the agentic web? Because clearly, like you said, if people haven't already realized it, we need the bots. We want the bots. We are going to have to give the bots access if we want to be relevant and get market share in a world where actions, commerce, and activity is being intermediated by them. How are you thinking about the agentic world right now with relation to Moca and Moca Network?
So I was one of the first to actually basically went all in, actually building nonstop around my agent. My agent can do more or less basically everything in the first 3 weeks, and only slept like 2-3 hours a day just because I was so obsessed with it. And I had so much fun. And what I learned about it as well is the space is moving so fast. And in terms of sovereign agent and every user having their own agent, it's still very limited to power user now. We do believe the world where people actually would be able to create their own agent when the infrastructure is ready, right? And when I say the infrastructure is basically you don't need to buy your Mac Mini, and you don't need your own VPS server to actually host your agent. There's actually security isolated infrastructure that the user actually own, and you can able to spin up your own agent, and you can able to install like different SKUs and all that as applications. And basically as a user, what we should be able to assume every single user having their own agent. And that's our assumption. Our assumption is every single user would have their own agent at some point. But then once you have your agent, you need to delegate rights and authorization to your agent to do things, to do amazing things. And you cannot do that unless you delegate authorization to spend your money, to delegate the agent to verify your data on behalf of you, right? Everything actually starts from the user as the hub. And then the spoke are basically all data, money, payment, commerce, right? But then who needs to control the spoke going out and let agent to do their thing is that you need the user to manage and control the policy of how much my agent can spend, where they can spend, when they can spend, or for how long they can spend, and also for identity. If I want my agent to buy a bottle of Jameson, on like supermarket.com, then how can the supermarket e-com platform verify my identity when it's like an agent actually going to buy a bottle of alcohol? Or I want the agent to do anything that actually require my airline status to get priority booking or to attribute my points. And all these stuff is actually based on the user identity. What Moca is focusing on is using the same identity core infrastructure. This is one of the identity plus XYZ. This is the identity plus agent, in a sense, using the same exact identity infrastructure, but then enabling that policy management and that delegation authorization to agents to actually spend your money, use your money, and also as well as use your data and verify your data in a safe and privacy preserved way.
Very cool. I mean, it's an entirely new layer of intermediation and acceleration of e-commerce up to a point. I'm almost certain that regulation is lagging in a bunch of these spaces. You used buying alcohol as one of the examples, but liability, returns, what happens if a particular agent does something on behalf of a human that is illegal or not able, or even just reverse transactions probably become a little bit complicated when the agent may not be online or the transaction may have happened anonymously. There's a whole bunch of nuances to it, but clearly the space is moving at pace, which I think is, like you said, we need to be able to enable the bots, and those people who build the primitives or the infrastructure that bots and humans together, or humans with their bots, whichever way you look at it, are able to move faster and better because of, is going to get business. I don't know how quickly the OpenAIs or the Claudes of the world build their own versions of these. And so when you said, I don't think too much about my identity competitors, I think Claude is a competitor on some of the primitives you're building up to a point. And so that's one that, again, up to a point, you will never be able to disintermediate Google in the way you will never be able to disintermediate Claude. So we probably don't have the time to get into that right now, but that would be the only one that would concern me. Thinking a little bit beyond the agentic web with a couple of minutes left, what else do you think are the remaining things that need to be unlocked to see products and services like Moca Network get more wide adoption? Obviously, you're grinding, you're speaking to partners. The primitives that you built extend beyond KYC, identity, into money, into ad tech. It feels like you've got the portfolio of services that generate value there. But what else would be the major unlocks for you to see wider adoption in the weeks ahead?
I think there is no other way. There's only one way to do this, is to be on the ground, talking to partners, sign them up, announce it, onboard the users, get more partners who are interested in that ecosystem, bring them on, issue data, basically work with their ecosystem, bring their partners on. How to see that, if you want to visualize that, is basically there's a one dot and then spread it out, and then there's many dots and spread it out, right? That's basically what a network effect actually means. There is only one way to do it. We also spend a lot of executive level effort on workshopping with the board. We help them even creating decks and budget projection, business model design, and all that to actually get the deal, just because all these partners also need help, and we are their thought partner to make them successful with identity, to make money and generate value, not only for the business in terms of revenue, but also for users too. What actually makes sense to the users, what makes sense to the board. Sometimes what makes sense to users don't make sense to the board. So we help with that, right? We're more than happy to invest hours in it, and executive hours too. So I think that's the only way. Until you hit a critical mass, then everything else would just come and everything would become organic.
Love that. Good old-fashioned growth and business development, albeit with some of the principles and understanding of how you build nodes, networks, how you scale something at the pace of Web3 or Web 3.0 or the agentic web, or a combination of all three, and having somebody with the ability to have worked in those domains, and also someone who's learned a little bit about the essential way of putting technology everywhere all the time, feels like a recipe for success. So Kenneth, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us. There were a bunch of comments that unfortunately we didn't get time to get into on the show, so we'll try and get to those in the comments afterwards. Please do, if you have other comments on this show, if you're watching back after the fact, please do jump in and we'll try and get to you in the days and weeks ahead. But Kenneth, thank you so much. I know you've probably got another call still after this late at night on your time in Hong Kong, but thank you for staying up with us. Have a brilliant rest of your week and have fun out there.
Thank you. My pleasure.